Hello friends, welcome to NRSMA. This is your host Vamsi Ala, and on today's show we have a guest. Her name is Lakshmi Sridharan. She is the Director of National Policy and Advocacy at SALT. She comes to this work with a deep commitment to racial justice after working for several years in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. She holds a BA in Ethnic Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Master's in City Planning from the Massachusetts Institute for Technology. Please welcome her.
Hi, this is Lakshmi.
Hi Lakshmi, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely.
Can you give us a brief intro of what SALT is, what SALT stands for, and what your role in that organization is, please, to start off?
Yeah, absolutely. So SALT is a nonprofit, nonpartisan national organization representing the South Asian community, South Asian American community, and we started after September 11th, 2001 to address the backlash that those who were largely perceived to be Muslim or Muslim and South Asian were being targeted in response to the September 11th attacks. And since then, we've grown to become a policy organization that focuses on issues of immigration, racial profiling, and continuing to address hate violence, which has surged in the recent year. And we're based here in Washington, D.C.
Right. The origin of me reaching out to you was an article where SALT was referenced with regards to the Texas versus U.S. case in relation with President Obama's 2014 executive order. Can you explain us what Obama's 2014 executive order is, the DAPA and the DACA Act, if you can, and then we can talk about the case. Can you give us a little light on it?
Absolutely. So folks might remember that a couple of years ago we used to talk about something called comprehensive immigration reform, and that's when there was a bill before Congress, which the Senate actually passed, that would allow a number of changes to be made to our immigration system so that fewer people could be deported and more people would have a pathway to citizenship in the U.S. As we know, the House of Representatives failed to pass anything related to comprehensive immigration reform, and the president promised even then that he would do what was in his power as the chief of this nation and use his executive authority. And so that's what you saw happen in November of 2014 was him issuing an executive action on immigration, and it included a number of things that were very much within his constitutional authority to do so to improve our immigration system. And two of those programs that you mentioned are DACA and DAPA. And DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and the executive action would actually just extend the period that people could be eligible for DAPA for 3 years instead of 2, because that program actually was underway starting in 2012. And so that version of DACA is still available, and people should to apply, and that gives you 2 years of relief from deportation and the ability to pursue higher education and work. And executive action would have expanded it to a 3-year period. And then DAPA, which is Deferred Action for Parental Accountability, is intended for the parents of children who are legal permanent residents or U.S. citizens. The vast majority are parents of U.S. citizens. There are a number of other criteria that they have to also meet that would allow them to stay in the country for a period of, I believe it's 2 years for DAPA, and both of these programs can be renewed.
Okay, and then those can be renewed through Senate, or is it the presidential executive order that can extend them? The
authority of the programs themselves have to be approved by whatever the new administration is. They don't have there's no congressional authority over these programs. And so it will be dependent on the next administration, which is, always risky. And then the program for the people who are enrolled in them, they can continue to keep renewing so that, once their 2 or 3 years is up, they can continue to apply again for the program. And these are the two programs that came, a number of things passed under President Obama's executive action, and particularly that impacts the South Asian community was around H-1B and H-4 visas. There were a number of changes to those that made it easier for those who are under H-4 visas to be eligible for work authorization, so that impacted thousands of South Asian women. And then, of course, an easier process for H-1B. Another program that passed was a bit unfortunate. It's an enforcement program called the Priority Enforcement Program, which has new priorities that will likely criminalize South Asian and Muslim communities as well as Southeast Asian communities because it reprioritizes anybody who's considered a national security threat. And as we know, those terms have, historically been used against our communities. And then it's the DACA and DAPA program that came under a court injunction. So essentially, a district judge in Texas decided to put a hold on these programs, and he had the authority to do so. And that it was then appealed in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the appellate court in that district of the country. And then that decision stood, and so it got appealed again to the Supreme Court, which is what we saw last week.
Okay. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of President Obama's executive order, right?
It hasn't been ruled on yet, and so the expectation is that the decision will come out in June, but we're not sure. And we have to also remember that we only have 8 Supreme Court justices right now, and so if there's an even split, the lower court ruling holds, which means that the programs will continue to be blocked. So
that is what it was. Okay.
Right.
So there'll be a continued hearing and in June. Once the ninth Supreme Court is appointed, right?
Right. It's our hope that a ninth Supreme Court justice will be appointed, or I guess we should say confirmed by then, since we have a nominee. But it may not happen. So we just have to hope that it's not an even split.
Okay. That's interesting. And how does this impact Indian or South Asian undocumented immigrants? I think you discussed a little bit earlier about H1, H4 visas, but let's talk about undocumented immigrants from the Indian and South Asian American perspective. How does this impact them?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, the vast majority of data out there is only collected on the Indian community, and so that's another one of the areas of advocacy for SALT is to continue pushing for data on other South Asian countries. But with the data that we do have on Indians who are undocumented in the United States, we are actually the 4th highest in terms of overall number of undocumented immigrants. So after Mexico, El Salvador, and Guatemala, Indians are the 4th highest, and we stand at 450,000 alone who are undocumented. And out of that, 185,000 of those 450,000 are eligible for DAPA. And another 20,000 are eligible for DACA. And so that's where we get the figure that a little over 40% of those 450,000 would be impacted by this ruling. And so that puts us at a total of just over 20,000. And so that's where we got that number.
You mean 200,000, right?
I'm sorry, 200,000. Sorry, yes, correct.
Yeah. The normal narrative of undocumented immigrants in this nation is always about South Americans. I mean, if you put that number, Indians or South Asians come as the 4th largest, and then just as your numbers go, with this program, DAPA and DACA, about 200,000 South Asians can benefit. So that's really interesting. That gives a number. What are the exact provisions in this act? I mean, can there be a residency offered to immigrants if they meet a social minimum criteria, or if they don't have any criminal background? What are some of the benefits that undocumented immigrants can get, and how do they proceed to get those?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of qualifying for these programs, we actually, right when the executive action was issued and before the court injunction happened in January of last year, we actually put out a fact sheet to explain these things to the South Asian community, and we had it translated into 6 South Asian languages where we knew the community needed some language support. So in terms of being eligible for DACA, some of the stipulations are that you have to have arrived in the U.S. before the age of 16, have continuously resided in the U.S. Since before January 1st, 2010. Either currently be in school or enrolled in higher education or have a GED or graduated from high school and not have been convicted of a felony offense a significant misdemeanor or pose a threat to national security or public safety. And so you can see that some of these criteria are a bit subjective. We do have some stories from our community, which we've been sending to U.S. Customs and Immigration Services, USCIS, to explain to them the reason that the enrollment rate is so low in our community, even though, as I mentioned, there's a high eligibility, is because there's a very profound lack of trust, specifically from the undocumented and working class portions of our community, in the government. And a lot of that is a legacy of September 11th and the different kinds of racial profiling programs that were put in place on our community members who are largely working class and Muslim, who don't trust government and are weary that there's profiling happening even when they turn in their application for these programs that they're eligible for.
Okay. And I'm assuming there are also some legal challenges for immigrants, especially with the language being different. Can you explain some of the legal challenges that these undocumented immigrants from the South Asian region have to applying for these programs? Of course, you already explained that they have insecurity or mistrust of applying and being subjected to, this treatment. But other than that, are there any legal challenges that are unique to South Asians?
Yeah, let's see. In terms of the challenges, especially like you said, related to language barriers, part of SALT's work was also advocating with USCIS around getting materials on their end translated properly into the different South Asian languages so that people knew that this program was available. Other challenges include what they call notario fraud, and that's typically in the Latino community, but it's something we've seen in our communities as well, which is lawyers that were, saying that they were going to help community members if they pay them a fee to get their applications ready, because oftentimes these applications are challenging to fill out and they need to be done properly or they're immediately rejected. They need to be filed at the appropriate time, and so it makes sense for them to get legal support, but a lot of folks were being cheated by, fraudulent lawyers, and so that was an issue. I think also, gathering all the documentation that's necessary and having, and even knowing where to go for legal support has been challenging. Some of the work we've done is work with, say, the South Asian Bar Association nationally to set up workshops for lawyers to go into gurudwaras and mosques and temples where the population is high, of course, and where there is some trust in the institution to be able to talk to people and say, this is the process and this is what you need to do. So those are some of the challenges that we have encountered with our community and are trying to address so that people can actually enroll.
Not to stray away from the main discussion here, the discussion has been that immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are a drain on the economic resources of the nation. Is there statistically or non-statistically, is there anything to prove that Asians or undocumented South Asians have contributed to the American growth? Okay, can you, not just as high-skilled or as cheaper alternative to high-skilled labor, right? Can you put some perspective as to why, or to put a case to say that, okay, we need to get these undocumented immigrants, be South Asian or not, into a legal path because they contribute to the growth of American society at large?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the pieces of research that we've commissioned a professor out of UC San Diego, to do for us, which is to actually quantify the economic contributions of South Asian undocumented immigrants specifically. And oftentimes the economic argument is what helps win a lot of people who, otherwise wouldn't support immigrants, unfortunately. And the Center for American Progress actually put data out just a few days before the Supreme Court hearing on Monday, which showed that the economic impact of DAPA in particular, the Deferred Action for Parental Accountability, would create 20,000 new jobs, increase our GDP by $164 billion, and add $16.7 billion in additional tax revenue over the next 10 years. And so this is, of course, not narrowed down to just South Asian folks, but just to give you a sense of, how much people are already contributing to the economy. And one of the things with undocumented immigrants in particular is that the vast majority of them end up, paying taxes and contributing to their economies, but not being qualified for the social benefits and health benefits that they should get. So in so many ways, they are actually giving a lot more than they're taking. And that's often not, the discourse that we hear.
Right. And is the research complete, or is it ongoing right now?
It's ongoing. So, yeah, part of it is that we are waiting for these programs to come online, and the professor's team will be attending different forums and town halls that South Asian communities will be organizing around the country and actually collecting raw data from them and using that as one way.
Right.
Friends, NRI Samay is a non-profit independent alternate media from Los Angeles, USA, which brings positive stories from grassroots activists from all corners of India and across the world. NRI Samay does not rely on corporate funding, and our shows are commercial-free. We only rely on your donations. Corporate-funded media is driven by the TRP rating, and profits are blurring the distinction between news and entertainment. Why do our news channels talk so much about cricket, movies, accidents, popular figures' personal lives, babies of heroines, gossips, etc., while they should be covering the struggles of people, inequality in our society, rural issues, and border security issues? Why did our media raise some corruption crusaders to the sky on one day and shut them off completely when graft charges were raised on those corporate sponsors? Media relies so much on the corporate funding and government blessings that they cannot report independently. NRI Samay is different. We don't accept funds from any corporations, and hence our shows are commercial free. We completely rely on donations from you. Please consider donating to NRI Samay, and please go to nrisamay.com and donate generously. This is the only way together that we can continue NRI Samay. All donations are kept transparent on nrisamay.com. And if you have any questions, please write to nrisamay@gmail.com.
So great. Can you give a few examples or cases that you as part of SALT worked hand in hand to assist, and maybe give a brief explanation of what their stories are, their background is, so we can put a face to these undocumented immigrant cases of South Asian origin?
Absolutely, yeah. So we actually collected video testimony and stories from South Asian community members over the last year and a half, and we released those videos the day of the Supreme Court hearing. So I would definitely encourage listeners to go to salt.org and check out our videos. There's a link to our YouTube channel where we have 6 different videos of young people, people, intergenerational, sharing their stories. And one story in particular is one of Hina Naveed. She's a young woman who talks about her the opportunities that she's been afforded in this country because she was able to qualify for DACA, which was helpful, but then also the challenges of, especially in South Asian communities and families where you have one person who may be a citizen, you have another person who's eligible for DACA, and then you have the parents who are not eligible for DAPA. And so we call this mixed status families. And so there's a number of challenges with that. And she talked about how her sister was very ill, and the only way that they could sort of stay in this country was, at a time to be undocumented. Even though she had DACA, her father couldn't qualify for staying here, but he had to take care of his other daughter. So she talks about those challenges. And then she also talks about, it's great that I have DACA, but how do I plan my life in 2-year increments? How do I apply for medical school? How do I get married? All these very real challenges that young people are facing despite having DACA. And so I think it's a really compelling story to watch, and I encourage people to check out her story.
Right. And any other example that you can provide? One more?
Yeah, we also, when the original DACA first came out in 2012, we actually profiled a series of young people and put their profiles on our website, and so those are available. And let me just give you a quick snapshot of some of these young people.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to, one person who we work with here, let me find her. Yeah, Pratishtha Khanna, who is a Maryland resident. She talks about, before I was documented, I could not earn a substantial wage or hold down a job due to circumstances beyond my control, regardless of my qualifications. Those limitations really take a toll on one's mental health. My Social Security number has given me a newfound sense of confidence. I now have a pride knowing that I can work and help support my parents and my family. And I'm so grateful to have DACA status. And she's a young person who often speaks at events here in D.C. since she's in the area. We have another young woman from Texas who talks about, I've been undocumented most of my life. I came to the U.S. from Pakistan when I was 2 years old because I needed long-term medical care. As I grew older, I faced many limitations as a result of my immigration status, including financial barriers to higher education and a lack of eligibility for internships and job opportunities. And though it's not permanent, receiving DACA has alleviated many of these issues, and I can also get a driver's license. So that's another important issue for folks to be able to have ID and the ability to have a driver's license. And she says, I finally have some independence. So these are two quick stories that we...
You are based in D.C., but I'm assuming your organization works nationwide. Is that correct?
Yes, so the way that we work nationwide is that we have what's called a National Coalition of South Asian Organizations, the NCSO, and that is a group of 54 community-based organizations that operate in local South Asian communities around the country. And most of our members are from where the South Asian population has traditionally been very high, which is, of course, California, New York, Chicago, Texas. But increasingly, we have people from the South. We just had Asha Kiran join last year, and they were the organization that supported Suresh Bhai Patel's family when he was beaten by a police officer last year. And so we see more and more that our communities are moving to new destination communities all over the South and the Midwest as well. So we're looking to get more NCSO members.
Okay, great. So, I went to your website. For any audience that is interested in facts and data, your website is a treasure trove, right? A lot of the topics that you touch on your website is about hate crimes on Indians and South Asians. Like you said earlier, that your organization started post 9/11. Reviewing most of these reports on your site, it looks like these hate crimes post 9/11 are related to Islamophobia. Majority of Indians, right? I'm talking preferably about Indians here, but most majority of Indians are non-Muslims. But these hate crimes are targeted against Indians. Can you explain us a little bit as to why this is so?
Yeah. So I'm actually, not sure about what the statistic of the actual percentage of the religious breakdown in our community, and that's something that we definitely should work on getting. But so I think by and large we see the hate violence targeting Muslims in our country because that has sort of been the rhetoric that's advanced by our elected officials and leaders. And we published a report called Under Suspicion, Under Attack in 2014, and it documented 78 instances of hate violence and 76 instances of political rhetoric. And by and large, the vast majority, over 80%, were targeted Muslim communities. And so there's absolutely a relationship between the way that our leaders characterize Muslim communities and the impact of the hate violence. And I should also say that our community members who are perceived to be Muslim as well are under attack, in the Sikh community in particular, for their own discrimination against the Sikh community, in addition to mistakenly being perceived as Muslim. Have also faced a lot of violence, as we know, with the massacre in the Gurudwara in 2012.
Right. And can there be better education awareness on this, or is it something, this whole thing should be treated as hate crime, and so that there should be no place in society for hate, right?
Absolutely, right. And that's always, that's one of SALT's core issues that we advocate around, is improving hate crimes prosecutions and laws. And right now, there are 46 different hate crime laws, because 46 states out of the 50 have their own hate crimes laws. So this is already a challenge, and there's no sort of uniform hate crime law at the federal level that covers, the breadth of hate crimes that we're seeing. And one thing SALT did, and the Sikh community really led this work after the Oak Creek massacre, is make the FBI add categories for anti-Arab, anti-Sikh, and anti-Hindu crimes, because they had anti-Islamic and sort of other, and there was no way to break down the magnitude of the hate crimes that was targeting our community. And so that's a huge policy victory that happened last year when the FBI announced that they added those categories. And now a lot of the work of our communities is to make sure that people know that, and that local law enforcement is properly documenting hate crimes, and so that the FBI can actually tabulate this data. So
right.
That's a big part of our work.
Great. Like circling back to undocumented immigrants, I think I mentioned earlier, the focus, like when it comes to undocumented immigrants, is largely about South American and Hispanic origin. I think we heard a lot about their stories day in, day out through the main media. But then you threw a large light saying that South Asians are the fourth largest undocumented immigrants, which comes as a surprise even to me. South Asia is like as far away as possible geographically to U.S. They form the fourth largest community of undocumented immigrants in this nation. Because you work with them on a day-to-day basis, do you have a sense as to why they're doing this? Why are they making this large transition and hardship to come to this nation and do this? Is it something political, economical, social circumstances that is driving these people to take that huge hardship?
Yeah, to come to this country. And, I think that's a very good question that applies to all of our immigrant communities, whether we're South Asian or not. And it was yesterday, SALT was part of a convening of folks, where we brought together immigrant rights groups and groups that work in the Muslim community, groups that work with refugees, to really talk about this. Like, what is common among our communities, and what are our immigrant populations facing here in this country? And, one thing that came up that I think we often forget about is the foreign policy and the economic policy of the U.S. that actually drives immigration. When we destabilize democratically elected leaders, which we've historically done in Latin America and more in the Middle East, when we have programs like NAFTA that completely decimate the economy of Mexico, these are huge push factors for why people come to this country. And I think in terms of undocumented South Asians, a huge reason too is political persecution. We have been working with Bases Rising Up and Moving Drum in New York City and the National Immigration Project based here in D.C. to elevate the story of hundreds of Bangladeshi Muslim asylum seekers who were languishing here in detention centers for over a year, who finally went on hunger strike in October so that their cases would be heard. And instead of actually listening to their case, ICE, which is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, allowed the Bangladeshi consular minister to come into the facility to break the hunger strike, which exposed their identities. The Bangladeshi media immediately published pictures of all of these folks, and then 27 of them last month were deported back to Bangladesh and are facing death threats. And so these are, and they worked, that's the kind of condition that they're fleeing, and they, came all the way here, and then this is the result of what happened. And so people are, and we see this in the news, people very much do risk their lives to come to the U.S. because this is one of the only countries in the world that still has sort of an unbreakable promise of hope and upward mobility that is, that people want to achieve. And yet what we do is make it harder and harder for people to achieve that. And so it's quite sad.
Right. So somebody, just a hypothetical viewpoint, somebody has heard our story and they know about your organization from South Asian immigration, undocumented immigrant background. Mm-hmm. They want to make use. They haven't used this DACA program. They haven't used it. How do they go about? Do you assist them on a case-by-case basis, or do you provide them guidance? What do they do about getting the advantage of this program?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually do not provide any direct legal services to individuals at SALT. Since we're a policy organization, what we try to do is put out, like I mentioned earlier, a fact sheet so that people have some general information, and it's mostly for community organizations to go back to their members and talk to them about it. What we have been doing is trying to identify as many South Asian lawyers as we can in cities where we know the undocumented South Asian population is high, so that they can be deployed into the community to provide this, direct legal services. Chicago has a great model for it. They had the first South Asian DACA collaborative that started a few years ago, and they have a great pipeline set up in Chicago to directly assist South Asian undocumented folks who want to apply for these programs. Groups in New York like Adhikar have been doing a great job in terms of getting their staff trained to fill out these applications for folks. And folks such as the South Asian Network in Los Angeles as well have been, and Maitri in San Francisco. What they need to do for people who are not attorneys is to get what is called BIA certification, and once they have that, then they're eligible to actually officially assist people in filling out these applications.
Can you explain what BIA stands for, please?
Essentially an accreditation program that is provided to folks who work directly with clients. And that way, it's a pretty rigorous program, actually, that people have to go through to become BIA certified. And once they do, then they're able to do this. And so it's the Board of Immigration Appeals. That's what I thought. The Board of Immigration Appeals staff will come in and provide these trainings, and so staff can be eligible.
Great. I think, you guys are doing a phenomenal job. If somebody is interested to volunteer and join your efforts, how do they get in touch with you, and what are some of the opportunities for volunteers to give their time?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually something we at SALT have been working on. How do we kind of leverage the individual interests that we're seeing in our community to be very supportive of these issues? Historically, we, in addition to our policy work, we also have a number of programs that we run. And some of those include capacity building for our NCSO groups. We also have a leadership development program for young people that we host every year. And we've traditionally also, I think many of people know about SALT through the Be the Change Day of Service that happens every October in conjunction with Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. And so that's something that we may or may not continue, but we want to leverage the power of individual service work to be involved, and also our doors are always open in our office for people to come volunteer. We typically get volunteers over the summer who either support us with our general work or who have taken on independent projects and help support our work in that way. And lastly, we have what we call SALT circles, which are opportunities for community volunteers in their own city to host conversations with their friends and families and broader community and neighborhoods around topics that impact us, like domestic violence or immigration and other areas like that. So those are ways that people can be involved. And we encourage everyone to join our mailing list. So if you go to our website, salt.org, there's a link very easily to join, and we have a list of 12,000 people and growing that we communicate with on a regular basis.
Okay. That's great. With that, I think we come to a conclusion of the show. So, friends, you heard SALT. It's spelled SAALT.org. Go to their website. They have a treasure trove of information out there. It's a very well-organized website, and it's very, very informative. And Lakshmi, thank you very much for your time. You have a nice day.
Thank you so much. Goodbye. Thanks.
Take care.
Friends, if you liked today's show, please go to youtube.com/NRI Samay and click on the subscribe button. You will get notified every time we publish a new show. And you can also like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Twitter, and Google+.